gets a goal? Who got the assist? Who got the assist?
Hello everyone, welcome back to Who Got the Assist, picking over the wreckage of our respective Game Week 3s, looking ahead to Game Week 4, rather lustily actually, after quite a downward Game Week outcome. I'm Tom, I'm here with a bit as usual, and here for one of those pods where self-inflicted frustration is indeed the order of the day. So this probably won't be the first beer tonight. I'm joined by Sam as always. You're right, mate.
Yeah, all good. Yeah, I'm a bit like you, a little bit frustrated with how Game Week 3 went. And when I first signed up to be a part of this pod, I always knew that eventually I'd have to come on this pod in a little bit of a rubbish mood because of a bad game week. Luckily, though, it has been bank holiday weekend, so I've had plenty of fun outside of the world of FPL. So I haven't been licking my wounds too much. Hopefully, this pod will help clear the air and get everyone over what seems to be a pretty bad game week for quite a few people, especially people who made the decision we did to get rid of Bruno. But for the time being, we can forget about that and move on with the show. We are Who Got the Assist. On today's pod, we will have some introspection from Game Week 3, picking apart what went wrong, what went right, and what we can learn from potentially our mistakes in Game Week 3. Our contemplate should be a really good one this week as well. So we're taking a look at the midfielders, whether Sterling is indeed the pick of choice this week, whether we should be looking at other midfielders, and indeed which midfielders we're even happy to sell at this point. Because a lot of the ones on the chopping block might not be on the chopping block anymore. So that should be a really interesting section, especially for me personally, because that is a move that I need to look at making. We're also going to take a look at some behavioural science around the Sterling performance. A bit of I told you so is going on at the moment. So it'll be interesting to assess the behavioural science behind that. And then we'll also have a look at the defensive questions in Game Week 4 and beyond as well, with quite a few defences not quite as solid as we thought they might be, and a few question marks over which the best defences to target might be moving forward. Finally, we'll have a look at the bold claims. We are on the board. One of us as a three, including the community, are now on the board. So at least we're getting up and running in that. We'll take a look at our Game Week 4 bold claims as well. And then finally, we'll wrap up with some questions from the community and take a look at our teams ahead of Game Week 4. We're recording on the bank holiday Monday, so all the games are done. So we have final Game Week scores. And hopefully you've all enjoyed your bank holiday, and we're here to welcome you into the new working week once more.
Oh dear, this sounds very ominous, doesn't it? Hello, we are the start of your working week. I mean, normally it's kind of like, you got through the first day. Right, here we are. Now it's like, oh, we are the portum, which leads you back to the orifice. But never mind. Game week score, Sam. I think we've got to talk about it. Obviously, I think a lot of this is sort of panto, but FPL doesn't matter. You might be to hear my daughter screaming behind me. That's what really matters. Like, FPL doesn't really matter. And at the moment, rank doesn't matter really. I mean, but you're so early on it, and if you've had a bad week, you've had a bad couple of weeks. I know those people who haven't had a bad week, and well done for continuing the momentum upwards. For us, there's been a bit of a check on that momentum, although last week was kind of actually quite poor. We both got 40. I've got 41 this week. I know you've scored 2 more. I think Sam, you're on 43. And basically right. That just came down to going through with what we were talking about last week. So in the end, I did sell Bruno for Bumo, and obviously now I feel a little bit silly. We'll talk about that in a minute. But yes, it wasn't the best. It wasn't the best game week for a multitude of reasons. And unfortunately, Ollie Watkins and Martinelli, who were the 2 main differentials, weren't able to do anything much. So Watkins, another customary assist, another 5 points. So if he keeps going at this rate, Sam, he's gonna be doing really well. To be honest, isn't he? What's that? It's 5 times 38. What was that? 190 points. 190 points for the season if he keeps up this rate. And then Martinelli sadly blanked again, and he may be on the chopping block. And you were very similar, weren't you? You did get a bit lucky though.
Yeah, so there was fortune and misfortune in what happened. So I don't know what came over me, but on the Thursday evening, I got this sudden wave of Fodenitis. I really wanted him in my side. And all of a sudden, I came to terms with the idea of losing one of the Man United assets, even though all week I was talking about how much I thought holding them for one last week just to see where the land lies after their good fixture against Nottingham Forest to see which one is the better sell, I started looking at my team, and I was thinking, I'm selling Bruno in game week 4 anyway. So why am I not doing it now ahead of Foden against Sheffield United? Obviously, at this point, we had no idea Foden wasn't going to start against Sheffield United. Very frustrating that he didn't. Obviously, not through any fault of his own. It sounded like he had a stomach bug. But obviously, looking at my bench, for any of you watching on YouTube, you can see a doggy's 12 points stuck, rooted firmly in the first bench slot. So I was very excited with about 10 minutes to go in that City game. Obviously, Sheffield United got the equaliser and it forced their hand a little bit. So Foden came off the bench. Luckily, did get a pretty jammy assist.
just a bit, yeah.
Yeah, just a bit. So luckily got away with it a little bit more than I might have. Otherwise, getting that 1 pointer from Foden would have been really, really brutal as a swing. Obviously, Bruno got 12 points. My first bench got 12 points. So I thought I might get away with it and just about be saved. But no, it wasn't to be. I fully deserved it for making what seems to be quite a panicky move last minute. I got the stars in my eyes over Foden and I got rid of an asset I thought would do quite well. So that is on me, and we'll assess the Bruno sell a little bit more, but it doesn't look like a great one considering he had another good game week of underlying data and obviously got the penalty as well to supplement the assist. So yeah, didn't feel too great, but 43 points, slightly ahead of you. But like you say, at the moment, it's all so meaningless in terms of the rank. 2 points is nothing at the end of the season.
Yeah. I mean, Sam, on the Bruno thing, I need to just reflect on the irony that I wrote a whole thread on how penalties are actually pretty impactful in FPL. The outcome of that, I looked over the last 5 seasons and worked out that you should expect 3 to 4 penalties a game week, a penalty every 3.65 games, I think it was. And ironically, that's kind of what undid me this week, because obviously through the if, for example, Bumo had scored and Bruno had only got an assist, then I'd be looking great. And same with Foden. Like it's very kind of, it's one of those where it's very much framed by the outcome, but it's always more galling. This is kind of one of the reasons why I don't really get too bothered by FPL anymore. It's always a bit more galling when it's your own decision which has led to the poor outcome. But that can be kind of the thing that really can get to you if you are kind of the mindset that FPL still upsets you. As I said, it's very early doors at the moment, not focused on rank. But I think if this had happened in game week, 20 plus, 30 plus, then I think I would be a little bit more emotionally affected. Like if it did sort of, could tell my progress. I'm really sorry if my daughter's really loud, by the way, listeners. So I know she's screaming. I sold Bruno in the end for similar reasons to you. So transfer planning, I wanted to be more aggressive this week. So I know hindsight makes this all look a bit silly. And I kind of thought, well, this week maybe I'll look at 2 City players for the Fulham game. So the transfer this week, I needed to just free up some funds. So I had 0.5 in the bank. Bumo and Brentford look good to the eye, as we mentioned last week. Bumo's non-pen XG was also good. So, yes, you could say, were you blinded by the penalties? Sorry, Sam. It just wasn't the case. It wasn't the case. Like we looked at the non-pen stuff last week, and he did look pretty good in that. And as you mentioned last pod, Sam, the premise was that if Bruno's assisting, it's probably going to be Rashford who's scoring. At least that's what we were thinking. And also there's EO cowardice that I think both of us sort of ended up kind of getting latched onto, that selling Rashford would hurt, but selling Bruno wouldn't really. And that was kind of reflected in the fact that, yes, we did take red arrows, but the red arrows were nowhere near as big as they could have been if we sold Rashford and he had then scored double digits. So it felt safe. But ironically, I guess, there's one thing I have asked myself in retrospect this weekend. And that question is, would I have done that move last season? If I was kind of during my really good period in the middle, which kind of ultimately got me the good rank, would I have done that? And I think the answer is no. So I think this all sort of comes back to things I've learned in the past about fine margins and what the good managers do. And I think this time I didn't adhere to that, and that's my kind of introspection there. And yes, there was a penalty, but the XGI still shows what it shows. So I think, ironically, as a result of all of this, like it's a case of a lesson being relearned, and it's time to sort of refocus on the core tenets which got me the good finish last year after a few years of floundering around. I mean, do you feel the same? Does that make sense to you? I know you didn't sell Bruno for Bumo, but does the sentiment behind that chime with you in any way?
Yeah, it does. And I think from my point of view, it's more about the reason I think it's more of a mistake is I always try to tell myself, don't sell an asset that you don't think is a problem. And going into the week, I didn't think Bruno was a problem. I didn't think he was a hard sell. He had great underlying data. He was looking like he was on the cusp of getting points. And I think I just got a little bit distracted by the grass is greener. I wanted the shiny new object, especially with the fixtures. And I think hindsight is 2020. So it's easy to say now it was a mistake. At the time, Foden, we thought would start. I think he would have played 90 or at least got like 60 plus if he wasn't ill. And we could be looking at a completely different scenario here. But at the end of the day, I try to play FPL on removing my weakest link each week if I can. And Bruno was not my weakest link. He wasn't a problem. And yet I was just trying to force something a little bit too much because of the fixtures play. And I think that's what's really frustrated me about my decision making this previous week. And I can also see it potentially being an issue this coming week as well with the likes of Martinelli, Matoma. They're not really massive problems at the moment. Obviously, Matoma's looking a little bit peripheral on the left right now, and Martinelli hasn't looked fantastic, but they're not huge issues. And the players we're buying in are fixtures plays alongside other factors as well. So I think it is a week-to-week situational call that you've got to make, and you've got to live with the decisions you make. So I'm not going to disregard it as a complete mistake that I had no logic in going down that route. However, Bruno has looked fantastic for 3 game weeks, and we've got seasons worth of data to suggest that he is going to tick along. So I am a little bit gutted that I made that call and forced my own hand when I didn't really need to.
Yeah, there's something called action bias, which I think probably underpins all of this, is the need to act, to do something, to change things up if you feel like you want to change the situation. We didn't have a terrible game week 2. We did have a bad game week 2. And I think kind of what happened potentially was that we were both kind of looking at it thinking, where can we make that leap? Where can we make that jump next week? Interestingly, there's the other side of it as well. There's an action bias. So when you're kind of too conservative and, you're kind of always kind of geared towards not doing something about a situation, whereas I'm more of a person who does something about a situation. Serves me well in life, but potentially not that well in FPL a lot of the time. So I was speaking to FPL Sports Science on DM just this morning, actually, and he said that he was lamenting the fact that he didn't sell Havertz to Sterling because obviously he was thinking, I'll be conservative, get one more week. So he was kind of the opposite side almost, where I was lamenting what I did do, and he was lamenting what he didn't do. And it's really interesting. There's 2 sides of the same coin there. But yeah, I completely appreciate that. And I think it's definitely one of those things where, we all wish at times where you could go back, turn the clock back, wake up again at the day when you did the transfer and know that, all right, maybe this isn't the best thing to do. But as I said, I think it's an important thing to just bear in mind. And for you and me, it sounds like it's both kind of reiterated to us are the way we play FPL, and maybe this move this week. And it's maybe good to get out of our systems early on, to be honest. The move this week was one which kind of ran contrary to the way that we like to play, which is admittedly quite boring. But you know what I mean. No, I think it's a good thing that has happened. I'm trying to put like a silver lining on this cloud, and there we go. I think there's every kind of chance that I buy Bruno back by game week kind of 5 or 6. I think game week 6 onwards, isn't it? They've got good fixtures again. So hey, I think that's kind of what we'll see.
Yeah, don't get entrenched in those mistakes. Like if you need to get him back, and it's certainly a move I'll look at making in the coming game weeks as well, potentially, if he continues in this way. Shall we move on to contemplate for today?
Yeah, let's do it. So contemplate, we've got that. I think it's a wider midfield question. There is obviously Sterling as the core man. There's also James Maddison, and there's a lot of kind of questions swirling around now. That I think the majority of people do have 2 free transfers. I know that a lot of people are tripled up on Chelsea already, so Sterling may not be kind of the answer to the question. So we're going to try to widen it a little bit further. We will discuss obviously Chelsea too, and whether one swallow makes a summer in terms of them whipping Luton, who, with all due respect, are there for the parachute payments. It seems like at the moment, and maybe they will improve, but that's kind of the impression that I got a little bit. We've got a few questions here as well that we're going to try to eke out answers to as we go along the way. Nate Jacobson, who's your favourite pick in midfield out of Eze, Maddison, Foden and Sterling for the next 6 games? He does own Foden, he says, but he's trying to swap Odegaard around for one of the other three. FPL on side, he asked similar question. You know, he's our players like JWP and maybe Rodri in the mix. City Extra reported online as him saying that with Kovacic behind him, he can now play in a more advanced role. So maybe there's something for him there out of nowhere. And Carl Brody, I guess, boils it down completely to kind of the big question, but we will discuss with those other guys too. If you have to pick up one of Sterling or Maddison for your team, which would you pick? So, I mean, should we? Let's take Sterling. And I know, as I said, that loads of people do have free Chelsea already and are likely to have Jackson if you don't have Sterling. Should we just take Sterling first, Sam? I mean, I think we've got to kind of we mentioned hindsight bias a little bit, and I think within that sort of the context that I kind of put that on the running order was that apart from those who put their money where their mouth is, so big respect to the likes of FPL, Fran, Jan Batra, and co. Apart from that, I listened to a fair few pods last week, and I didn't hear any other content creators extolling Sterling's virtues, and I think this is one where we've got to put our hands up a little bit and say, yep, we noted he was on the radar to some extent. So preseason, we said he had the biggest drop. Is he this year's Rashford? But because of one performance, to some extent, I mean, it's not entirely because of one performance, we are kind of still now looking at him a bit more than we would have done if he blanked, for example. So I think that's kind of where it is with me. But there's kind of we're all now kind of we've got to kind of cover ourselves by saying, you know what? Yes, there is an element of hindsight here because he's now on the radar, his own thing. But that's what the contemplate's all about. And Sterling, Sam, I'm guessing he's one who's now in your crosshairs as a potential transfer.
Yeah, he's certainly in my thinking, and it will come down to which 2 of 3 midfielders I'm looking at this week. And Buemo's still in the conversation because I still don't have him. But Maddison on the graphic and Sterling both look like fantastic pickups at the moment. Sterling, like you mentioned, I don't think any of us would really be mentioning him if he hadn't returned in a big way against Luton. It is important to note that it's Luton, and Chelsea did dispatch them with relative ease. They won't be playing Luton every single week, and we're yet to see just how bad Luton are, really, because they've only played 2 matches, and both of those matches were against strong opposition in Brighton and Chelsea. So maybe we're over egging the pudding slightly on how bad Luton might be, but my instinct is we're probably not, because they look quite open. Sterling does look like a player rejuvenated in this new system. Poch seems to be getting the best out of him, and Poch is really big on fitness. So I was listening to Above Average FPL earlier today. They were really commending Sterling's minutes prior to his Chelsea move, and it's actually something I didn't really notice about him at Man City. The amount of minutes he was getting when he was starting was like 80 plus every single week. His average minutes were 88 per week over a season when he was starting the match. So this guy is a fitness monster. Poch absolutely loves that. So he will get really good minutes in this Chelsea system. On that right wing as well, he looks like he's cutting in. Obviously, he did it fantastically well against Luton. Won't be going up against a defence that will buckle at that every single week. But the next few fixtures are really positive. So yes, there's hindsight bias cooked in a little bit here, but in a way it's quite nice that we've seen him do it now to remind us of his talent, because this is a player that can regularly hit 200 points. He did it three seasons, I think, at City. He hit 200 plus. He's got a 35 return season in him, 18 goals, 17 assists, I think I saw. So this is a guy who knows how to find the net, who knows how to create chances for others, and should be, at his age now, a leader in that dressing room. So I think Sterling on it, and he looks on it, could be a fantastic pickup at 7 million. Despite the fact that there is hindsight bias, there are great fixtures to come. Let's not avoid him just because we think Luton's out of the way. I think he's still going to be fantastic value for money. It's just whether he's better value for money than some of the others, Buemo, Maddison, Mitoma even still, and the likes of Rashford, Arsenal boys as well.
Certainly. I mean, he's definitely shown signs getting back to, but we've got 3 game weeks, good in the first half versus West Ham, I'd say. I think that was the first time many of us eyeballed him and said, you know what, he's looking like he fancies it a little bit. And obviously flourished versus Luton, who, as I said, probably aren't going to cut the mustard in the Premier League. Did you see Ryan Giles's heat map, who was nominally defending against him? The guy wasn't even in his own half, quite a lot in that game. Hindu Monkey brought it to my attention. It's just simply hilarious. You've got acres of space behind him for Sterling to exploit. They simply won't play Luton every week, but they still have, Forest, Bournemouth, Villa, and Fulham over the next 4. So, it's a bit of a gamble, I suppose, a bit of a forecast forward that over those kind of next 4 games at least, and they've got a decent run for a little while, that they're all going to be players, they're all going to be kind of matches within which I'm going to be expected to sort of return against the price. And you've got the pedigree we spoke about last week. I think for you and me, and just to address Jackson owners, the big thing for me, at least, I know you're looking to sell this guy immediately, but I'm looking to try to keep Watkins. Obviously, 3 assists in a row isn't exactly what I wanted. Another frustrating performance, missing 2 big chances, one in particular, second half, straight down the throat of Trafford when it probably should have scored. And also deprived of a tap in when Zaniolo lets the shoot into the square later on. But I'm happy to trust in him, as maybe I should have with Bruno. So all of that means is that I'm not on Jackson, and I don't want to do the team surgery to get Jackson in alongside in a 3-4-3. So that then leads me logically to think I want another Chelsea attacking asset, which then kind of, we left it a week this week, the week just gone. And I think Sterling's one who's put his hand up. And I think, sometimes, okay, you can think a bit further beyond it, but I'm okay with that. Adding to above averages stuff, I also pulled out a bit of very old data when I was looking back at this. Back in October 2020, I did something called the Explosiveness Index, which counted players hauling, so scoring over 10 points, and exploding, scoring over 15 points, and looked up the last kind of 3 seasons back then to see kind of who topped that. And Sterling was the most explosive player when back in his Man City days, reflecting the data points that you mentioned about past seasons. He had 8 over 15 hauls in 3 seasons between 17-18 and 2021. So I guess it's kind of one of those where you're kind of, yes, okay, there's the element of hindsight. We've had a really good game here, but the fixtures are there. You've got a player who, does the fixtures beget form? Does a positive performance beget form? That's the gamble you're going for. And I can understand when people, especially if you've already tripled on Chelsea, you might be thinking, I didn't really need to worry about it. It was Luton. A swallow doesn't make a summer. But for us in the position where you can get Sterling, then I think that there's definitely a really positive sort of spin you can put on it. As James Planet FPL always says, pick your narrative. And I think it certainly does make sense here with Raheem, especially at that price. That's obviously great. But do we think he's back? It's one of those where you've got to really, you can only really come to a decision on that, a conclusion on that, kind of in 10 weeks' time, can't you? Really?
Yeah. And by which time it's too late because the fixtures have already been and gone. So you have to kind of make a call now. Like Luton for me was a Jackson audition. And even though he scored, he did look lively, but he looked raw. And I saw nothing to suggest that I should have him over Watkins. So I'm not getting rid of Watkins ahead of Liverpool without Van Dijk either. So Watkins will stay for me, no question. And so Sterling, because I'm not tripled up on Chelsea, becomes a viable option. So it's whether or not at 7 million, there's an outside shout he could be on pens. I personally doubt it, but it's not impossible. And he looks like he's going to be one of the key men in that Chelsea attack. So with the fixtures, I think having a Chelsea attacker, and I'm not counting Chilwell because even though he is effectively an attacker, a lot of us already have him anyway. I want 2 slices of that pie. Having Sterling does seem quite helpful if you're not going to have Jackson. And because we're already on Watkins, you're obviously happy with him. You're his number 1 fan. I'm probably his number 2 or 3 fan at best. So I'm more than happy to hold Ollie Watkins. The returns will come. Yeah. Because I'm not going Jackson, Sterling is high in my mind. And it is really a battle between him, Maddison, who's on the screen, and Mbeumo, who, again, he didn't return this week, but I'm a little bit worried about him every single week. His EO's up at 50% now, around our rank, and he could get a penalty any given week. So, and the fixtures are still good, and he goes up against Bournemouth, who look like they're playing a high line. He could exploit that really easily. So I'm sure Sterling will do really well in the next few weeks. It's just whether or not I think he'll do better than some of these other really good options. So I guess that's the dilemma here. At the moment, I think he probably does, because I feel like what I was saying last week about Bruno actually rings more true for the Sterling versus a Foden dilemma, for instance. He is much more weighted towards goals, and I think he's looking to be Chelsea's top goal scorer this year. He said it himself in the post-match interview. He wants to beat the likes of Jackson for goals this year. So he's gonna be eyeing up returns whenever possible at 7 million, 7.1 now. He looks great value. So it's going to be hard to avoid him this week, I think.
Certainly. I mean, so while you've got Sterling there with about 550,000 transfers in, you've got Maddison as well with 400,000, and he's sort of for some people, the either or. I think for us, for me, it might be both. We'll come on to that later on. Maddison, I think just to spool back a tiny bit, Spurs in general are really interesting. Yes, very, very early data. One thing I did notice on FBref was two particular stats, so progressive passing and progressive carry. So the middle of the road for team non-pen XGI, but with Basuma and Papsar in that midfield as kind of functioning as kind of the double pivot midfield engine, however you want to describe it, and they're actually second overall for progressive carries at the moment, which is going to be Basuma, I think, when he carries, and fifth for progressive passing. So they're really getting into those positions as a team and kind of lurching forward as a team. And Ange said when he was appointed that he wants his teams to have the ball and that he wants to play entertaining football. And at the heart of all of it, of course, is James Maddison, who's now seventh non-pen XGI and has scored his first goal this week. What's really interesting is comparing Raheem Sterling and James Maddison so far on a per 90. Yes, health warnings apply, but this year, yes, we've got Sterling scoring more goals than Maddison because of the one game, but they're actually equal for expected goals, and Maddison has had more shots on target, more shots in the box, better assist ratio, better expected assists, more attempted assists, more big chances created than Raheem Sterling this year. So across loads of the analog in inverted commas stats, and also in loads of also kind of on the expected, they're kind of quite similar, but Maddison is kind of winning out on those sort of analog areas. Really nice fixture run for Spurs until November, taking Burnley and Sheffield United next two before the international break, before a trip to Arsenal. Should be goals in that, to be fair. Home to Liverpool, again, should be goals in that. And then three more good games in Luton, Fulham and Palace. So I think with both of these players and the teams that they're playing for, it goes back to what we were saying way back in pre-season about Spurs and Chelsea being very interesting for us in FPL because they haven't got any Europe to worry about. You can be expecting them to be playing these guys week in, week out. And if we've identified them as being sort of the attacking threat, creative, whatever you want to call it, fulcrum of their team, then it surely makes a lot of sense to buy these talismanic characters while they are low priced. And I think they both have a really good case, basically. I can see why people who are kind of thinking, oh well, Sterling, he's maybe a 1 week thing. I need to see more, or maybe you're tripled up on Chelsea. Absolutely, go for Maddison at the moment is where I'd be. What are your thoughts on that, Sam? It must be quite a tricky one if you're wondering about those two plus Bumo as well, and how you kind of make it all work.
If I'd gone for Bumo last week instead of Foden, right now there would be no doubt in my mind I'd be getting both of these guys this week. That I would 100% be going on both of these because I love the way they're playing at the moment. Maddison, we've already spoken about Sterling and all of his benefits. Maddison is running the show for Spurs at the moment, and he's also getting into those advanced roles almost in that dual nines with Richarlison as well. Richarlison's not bearing his chances at the moment, but he will get one eventually. Spoiler alert to bold claims. He will hopefully get one eventually, and when he does, Maddison is the one that's laying the ball off to him. So, and he was quite unlucky not to get one against Bournemouth as well. He actually had some good footwork to get him in beyond the keeper, and then the defender came around and covered. So Richarlison's returns will come, and Maddison will be the one benefiting from that as well. He'll get the assist from that, and also Richarlison is quite good at dropping deep and playing that dual nine with Maddison, giving Maddison that free roam to almost make that late run beyond the defender, with Richarlison as the decoy. So goals will come from Maddison, like we saw against Bournemouth. That's almost like a case study in what I expect from him in that late run in, beating that defensive line. They're on their hind legs and he's running in behind and beating that trap. So I think returns will continue to come for him, and Spurs, everything they're doing is going through him in some way, shape or form. And even at Leicester, even when it was a team that wasn't functional in any way whatsoever, and they were failing to get the ball to him, he was still finding ways to create chances and goals out of almost nothing. So I want them both. I really, really want them both. And the only thing that might put a spanner in that works is the fact I don't have Bumo at the moment. And whether or not against Bournemouth this week, I prioritise him, a penalty taker, a guaranteed penalty taker for Brentford, high owned, and cheaper than both of these assets. Is he still a better buy than one of these two players? Ideally, I want all three, but I'll have to pick two of them, I think. And at the moment, I think it's the two on screen I'd probably go for. But that might just be shiny new object like it was with Foden last week. So I'll have to have a proper think about it. Muted, Tom.
I think all of this, before we move on to widest differentials, like, I think speaks to just what seems to be emerging at the moment, at least as a trend, which maybe is how we're going to be playing for a little while at least. I've been thinking about it a little bit, and I think there's kind of a really decent strategy that could be done here, which is just basically using your transfers on midfielders. Like, we've got 3-5-2 at the moment, right? And say you're kind of thinking, well, probably won't be selling Saka anytime soon. If you own Bruno, you probably won't be selling him anytime soon. You may not even be selling Rashford anytime soon. But that leaves you with maybe 2 or 3 slots. So obviously, we both sold Bruno, so we've got an extra slot there. But that leaves you with slots to play with at that point. You can leave the defense, because most of us are able to pick up a very decent defense, and you can just kind of leave that be. Yes, okay, the likes of Arsenal and United, if you own Saliba or Nana, and Brighton as well, best opinion, having tougher fixtures, you can leave your attack, because if you've got Haaland and Jackson or Haaland and Watkins, you can just kind of leave that and focus your entire kind of transfer activity on the midfield, because there are just so many options flying around that even if you do get it wrong, they're all of a commensurate price range because of the leveling of the price this year. Unless the player that you're looking to buy is called Mo Salah, or maybe Kevin De Bruyne later down the line, you don't really have a problem in getting rid of a player. And the whole thing, as I said, second, third pod back, it seems to have just degenerated into when you hop on and when you hop off. And keeping your transfers free for that does seem to be the way to do it. Or at least that's kind of how it feels to me at the moment, with all of these midfielders putting their hands up, and with us all, many of us in a 3-5-2. I think that it kind of lends itself to being laissez-faire with our midfielders, and having a couple like Saka, like Bruno, that you kind of leave there. You're happy, whatever, they'll keep ticking over. But with the rest, just if the fixtures are good, get them in. What do you think about that?
Yeah, at the moment, I'm looking at my team. As the forward line picks itself right now, I've got no priorities in manoeuvring Ollie Watkins over to anyone. Defensively, maybe on the horizon, there's a move to a Newcastle asset if you don't already have one. But I don't think it's a priority. Botman's gone down injured. Trippier, maybe there's still question marks over whether or not he continuously starts and gets the minutes in the league when he's got Champions League to contend with. And Livramento is, as a Saints fan, I can tell you he's a brilliant, brilliant right back and might even play further forward at times as well. He will get minutes at some point. So Trippier, 6.5, is he going to provide value down the line? I don't know. But those could be maneuvers you might want to make at some point in defense. But really, there's not too many defenders I'm looking at and thinking, oh, I need to go and get that player right now for the upside, unless you don't already have Chilwell, for instance. A Doggy, maybe, but at 4.5, he's always easy to get to. I don't think you need to prioritize it over some of the more explosive picks in the middle. And I said on one of the preseason pods, if you've got a head-to-head decision to make on who to sell, who to buy that week, try to pick the player that you think has the highest upside. The decision of most consequence, or the position of most consequence, is usually the route that I would recommend taking because it's going to have the most potential benefit of an impact to your side. In this case, I think more often than not, it will be the midfielders. And when there seem to be quite a lot of teams that we can target early on already. So Luton, Sheffield United, Everton, Nottingham Forest, maybe even Wolves,
Burnley.
Brighton, Burnley. Brighton defence looks pretty easy to get through right now. Liverpool defence, I wouldn't be too scared about taking on. A lot of these teams look quite porous at the back. So having midfielders, rather than prioritising transfers for midfielders with good game weeks up ahead, seems to be a good upside pick, whereas manoeuvring for defences that might only get 1 clean sheet in 3, maybe an attacking return if you're lucky, doesn't seem like big enough upside for me. So yeah, if there were more transfers in the forward line to make, then I might recommend doing some there. But it looks like midfielders are where the value is at the moment, and they're all around the same price. So it's easy to hop on, hop off, maneuver a couple of weeks at a time. If you're feeling really aggressive, you could even look at Jarrod Bowen for this week.
Yeah,
I know one of the questions is James Ward-Prowse. I obviously love him, so I would not go against that. But Jarrod Bowen looks like more of the goal threat, and against the high line, against the high line that they're going to go up against in Liverpool and Man City after Luton, that might not even be that bad. So you could hop on the likes of Jarrod Bowen as a differential and still have plenty of joy. But all of the players that we're recommending at the moment seem to be pretty much midfielders.
Absolutely. I think there's only one more that I want to mention, Sam, that you've neglected to mention. It's your boy. You defended him like your firstborn during the pricing pods. Moussa Diaby, there he is, ninth for XGI. That's a non-pen that is this season. And taking the sheen away from Ollie Watkins. I know that Villa do have a couple of, on the FDR at least, tricky fixtures, but if you apply your brain to that, you kind of look at it and think, well, yeah, Liverpool away and Chelsea away. Is that really that worrying? No, not really.
Fine.
And to be honest, you can hold this guy up until December, game 15, when Man City rolled into town, then Arsenal rolled into town the next week, game 15 and 16. So it's another long-term pick, and it's one where you almost kind of, if you could just say, right, FPL, you know what I want to do? I want to get rid of one of my forward slots. I'm happy to give you one of those, and I'll take a sit midfielder. Like, it's really it's really bountiful right now in terms of options, isn't it? And I guess taking players out for loads of people is kind of the other side of it. Just to kind of round off this kind of midfielder part of at least contemplate. I guess, is it time for Martinelli to go? Is it time for Mitoma to go? Where do you stand on that?
Those are the two potentially on my chopping block. It feels wrong. I'm actually fairly comfortable with selling Mitoma, and even though he's been fantastic, he's a quality player. The fixtures do turn a little bit sour now. I think it's Newcastle next up. And also with Mitoma, he does look like he's still playing quite wide out on the left. And if he's not creating the chances for himself, it doesn't look like he's getting given too many easy wins to get the goals right now. He's having to create it all himself. And it looks like he's more weighted towards the assists and chance creation as it stands. I have no doubt he'll tick along. And even with bad fixtures, Brighton will score plenty of goals. I'm sure he'll hurt me once or twice in the next few weeks if I do sell him. But the players that I'm looking at bringing in have much better fixtures, are just as involved and in pretty relatively similar looking attacks to Brighton at the moment. It may be a step down, but they're more involved and more central to the point scoring opportunities in those attacks. So I feel fairly comfortable getting rid of Mitoma and chancing my arm against those fixtures for Brighton for the next few weeks. And then Martinelli's the one that I'm really 50-50 about at the moment. I think he has been probably the main disappointment remaining in my midfield so far this season. He has looked a little bit off it, dare I say. Like, he hasn't looked quite at his best so far. It might be down to the way Arsenal have been playing. He has been out quite wide on the left so far, not really too involved, a bit like Mitoma, not too involved in the actual goal threat so far. This fixture coming up against Man United might actually be the one where he is because he does perform really well against the best sides. They will play that high line, and Arsenal will try to exploit that with Martinelli's pace. He is usually the one that stays high, operates on the back line, and tries to break that with that counter-attack with pace. And I think I have vague memories of him doing it 2 or 3 times against the likes of United, possibly Man City in the past as well, and being very highly successful. So it feels like it could be potentially a mistake or a week too early to get rid of Martinelli. But when you look at the players you're bringing in, you want them not only for this week, but for the next few weeks as well. And Martinelli's minutes do start to come into question pretty soon with Champions League coming in. He did get a good amount of minutes in game week 3, but it felt possibly circumstantial because they were trying to make sure they won the game. Trossard can play there. Now Jesus is back as well. Maybe Trossard will move over to the left every now and then and get minutes. Probably not start, but get 20 minutes here, 30 minutes there. So is he a player that potentially at 8 million might be a little bit too risky to carry when you've got other options like Sterling, like Maddison for less and more central to their team's attacking threat?
Is it another Bruno though? I don't know.
It could be.
You don't have the markers quite there with Martinelli. It's 0.7 XGI thus far, so he's not performed as much as we'd have liked him to. Matoma, more of an assister thus far. Again, 3 weeks, blah yada yada, kind of down there. And just for reference, Sam, how many shots on target has Matoma had this season, do you think?
Would it be too bold to say 1?
It is 1, yeah. So 1 shot on target,
right?
One shot, 1 goal.
So.
And he did that a lot. He did that a lot last year as well, when he was on his little streak. I think we were again in a situation where yes, if there's the guy with the dribbling thesis dribbles his way through and has a go, and fair play. But I think there's probably enough doubt versus the 2 guys that we've kind of highlighted here to think, yeah, okay, maybe you'd be all right given the fixtures being what they are. And Brighton also, well, I mean, we saw it last year, with the game against Everton, for example, that there are some times when Brighton do come unstuck. But you've got Newcastle and Man United next 2, and then you've got Bournemouth, which is a good game in game week 6 at the moment on paper, and then you've got Villa, Liverpool, and Man City game week 7 till 9, and then they run to good fixtures in game week 10. So maybe this again is another example of when you kind of utilise what I said about just focusing on the transfers on midfield. When a player does come into a good run, get them in, whatever. But if they are kind of coming out, yes, okay, they've done well for you. There's this, that, and the other. But there's other players who may be better value at that moment in time. Over the course of the season, we shall see. But in the moment of time, if you're just kind of forecasting what's going to happen over a very short period, which is obviously quite a noisy thing to do, you might be able to kind of think, okay, I'll be all right. I'm happy with the decision that I'm making here, versus maybe one like Bruno, where maybe we probably did do a bit of a whoopsie. Just to round up this section, overall, it sounds like we're both sort of mostly pro template-ish, if we're counting Mr. Sterling and Mr. Maddison as the 2 guys who are pro template this week. And that's absolutely fine. Later on in the season, there's going to be points where you're kind of like, oh yeah, well, this guy's scored this week. I don't think that is probably going to be a portent for future returns, but early on, it is a lot of very vibe worthy. It's just trying to be careful about what you're doing and kind of asking yourself the questions that maybe we should have asked ourselves last week a little bit more regarding these players. But I'm slightly more happy with Martinelli and Matoma, even bearing in mind the negative experience we both just had at selling a midfielder electively. And I think I'm a little bit happier to sell those 2 than perhaps I should have been to sell Bruno. And Chelsea in general, I mean, very short and sweet. Just one swallow make a summer with a victory versus Luton. I mean, I think it's just a case of backing the fixtures, isn't it, Sam? Like they're ideal for a team that's looking to gel. And to be fair, most people have doubled up, tripled up anyway, and it's just us who are here saying about them. So yeah, I think it's probably all right, isn't it?
Yeah, agreed. I think fixtures can breed form. They look like a side with a plan, and even though they're just getting to know each other, I think the signs are there that they're going to be a pretty decent force this season. They've got a lot of quality players in there, and the fixtures ahead are the ideal ones to help them settle down, learn what makes them tick, And having two, maybe even three of them seems like a pretty good idea. If you're not already on Jackson, then I'd highly recommend having a look at Sterling very seriously now instead of Jackson, potentially.
Perfect. So the other thing that, as I mentioned earlier on, you may have some questions about like sort of Nana, about sort of Saliba. I know that there's a few questions on Gabrielle that we got earlier on. Hindi Monkey, who asked us another question, said, should I hit out Gabrielle at the moment? I wonder whether it is probably time to bite the bullet on a player like that. So you may be thinking, what do I do? Only a few weird people are looking at selling a goalkeeper. It's something that was in mind for me, but I think that's probably not going to happen. I think I'm going to leave Anana in because from game week 6 onwards, Man United fixtures better again. He does get saves. Got very unlucky, but I think the two Forest goals were both sort of, very sort of like on another day, those don't happen, sort of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you are looking to sell a Saliba, we always have to come back to how good Man City defensively are, don't we?
Yeah, so for any of you listening to the pod, I've just switched over to the top 5 defenses in terms of XGC so far. Obviously, again, 3 game weeks in, very little we can really read into this, except Man City have got half the XGC of any other team already this season. So it's following the trends that we know from seasons past. 1.29 XGC so far overall. So over 3 game weeks, they barely conceded 1 XGC overall, which is ridiculous. Obviously, they've had good fixtures, but still, like one of those fixtures was still against Newcastle. They have been good.
Yeah.
And they've brought in Gvardiol as well, so they should be, if anything, tighter than we've seen before. The next closest for anyone listening in on the pod is Brentford at 2.53, followed closely behind with Arsenal 2.76. Crystal Palace and Chelsea make up the top 5. Both of those have an XGC of over 3, so just over a goal a game on average you'd expect them to concede. But yeah, Man City are the talk of the town. Obviously fairly unlucky to concede against Sheffield United. That would have been 3 in 3 for clean sheets. But yeah, it's whether or not we think they'll provide value. And as we know with Man City, all of the bonus points tends to go to the players scoring all the goals. So are we happy with 2 points, 6 points, 6 points, 2 points with any of these City defenders, goalkeepers? And would we prioritize bringing them in ahead of the likes of a Saliba, for instance? Gabrielle, probably quite an easy one at this point.
Yeah, definitely. I think long-term Edison owners at the end of last season will tell you that there's definitely a concentration problem with Man City a little bit. I think that's kind of what we saw against Sheffield United to some extent. But overall, the odds are always in your favour of getting a Man City clean sheet. And I think that's kind of, if you do have a Gabrielle and you're looking to sell them on, you're probably looking at, it's very unsexy, you're probably looking at Ruben. If you want to save some money, you go for Guardiola and maybe get the update from Stones, on Stones from Pep or Lilo, I think it will be, come this weekend in Spanish. But I think that probably be where you go. I wouldn't. So looking at the data that you've pulled here, Sam, yes, okay, it's 3 game weeks, but Arsenal in 3rd again last year, fairly decent, especially the first half of the season. Bit of an aberration to some extent against Fulham. The first goal was just obviously a horrible mistake. The second goal, perhaps kind of the sort of goal you'd expect to concede something kind of 3 or 4 times out of 10, but the first goal was just a horrible mistake, really. So maybe you kind of have a little bit of faith in the likes of Saliba. Maybe people looking selling Estepinian. Maybe Bryson have obviously not been, as you referenced earlier, the best picture of solidity at the back, but you've got still that sort of dual thing of covering the defense if they do keep a clean sheet, and also you've got the attacking returns for Estepinian, who does often end up on the penalty spot unaccountably when they're going forward. So there you go. I think Brentford is interesting though, if you are looking to kind of maybe sell a goalkeeper, and maybe Flecken's the man you go for. But yeah, for the next 4 at least, which are very good for Man City. Obviously, this weekend you've got the Fulham game, and then you've got West Ham away in 5, or 2nd in the table at the moment, Sam. So you never know. And Kudus is there, and Nottingham Forest in 6th, and Wolves in 7th. So maybe you'd be kind of have a decent-ish expectation of 24 points if you did get a defensive player in. But I do think, Sam, there is one player that is currently nestled on your bench that a lot of people are looking at, gone up to 4.6 now.
Yeah.
A few really good points that are made out there. So Philip Novak, who I reposted his tweet earlier on, or his ex earlier, I'm not sure what it is these days, who will be coming on the pod at some point this year. He noted that Udogi's pen box involvement at Udinese was highly encouraging, as we saw writ large in the Bournemouth game. And FPL Zhao, Joe, he also mentioned that Udogi and Estepinian have really good rotation, actually, for quite a long time, where you can just use the two interchangeably, which is something that you've kind of got now, actually, because you've got a doggy on your bench.
Inadvertently,
But by mistake, you're a genius, Sam. Where, you've got 2 games for a doggy, Burnley and Sheffield United, where you can play him, bench Estepinian for Newcastle Man United, play Estepinian for Bournemouth, choose one next week, and then it sort of goes on from there, where you can kind of mix and match between the two. I hate defensive rotations. I hate having a player on the bench who could be in the starting 11. I hate having to make that decision. So that's not for me. But for you, maybe that could be something to consider. And do you think that he, oddly, might be a player that people should be considering, especially if you're, maybe in your situation, it might be a case of kind of thinking, you know what, might be able to leave Maddison because a doggy may cover the attack. It sounds so ropey, doesn't it?
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about it like that, but you might have a point. Like, he is getting into those advanced roles. He's also inverting quite heavily, so he's getting into those midfield positions where actually you'd expect Maddison to operate as well. So maybe there's an argument to say you could cover him to some extent. I haven't really thought about it that way, to be honest, at this point. And also, I hadn't really even thought about rotation with Estepinian necessarily. With a doggy, to start with, it was a little bit of an upside punt. I saw his data at Udinese. He was touted as quite an advanced left back, and obviously a 4.5 million starting defender for a team of Spurs quality is a good team to be targeting anyway. So I was happy enough to just have him sat first on my bench for most weeks. When it got to game week 3, 4, and 5, when the fixtures turned really good, I was going to start looking at whether or not he could come in. For me this week, he's probably coming in for Saliba. Obviously, Man United, not a great chance of a clean sheet. It could happen, but Saliba is also a player with very limited attacking upside. A doggy, 2 promoted sides in the next 2 fixtures as well. He will be starting probably in both of those game weeks for me now, and I have no hesitation in starting him over a superior defence in Arsenal, but a defence that I'd expect to concede in game week 4. In terms of rotation with Estepinian, I'm not that sure about ever really benching a player with that much attacking upside. So Estepinian, even against the likes of Newcastle, I think will get forward, will have plenty of opportunities for more likely assists and goals, but he often does find himself in almost striker-like positions, as De Zerbi has mentioned in press conferences past as well. So I'm always a little bit nervous ever leaving him on the bench, even with poor fixtures to come. So I think for me, Udogi is more a 12th man than a significant rotation with Estepinian. But with Arsenal's fixtures to come, it means I don't need to rush a move to get rid of Saliba. I can give it a couple of weeks and have a think about a Newcastle asset in game week 6, for instance, and just leave Saliba on the bench for the next couple.
As I brilliantly bought George Baldock at Sheffield United for this exact reason, Sam, because this week I don't have to play Saliba. I can play George. No,
Wow.
I'm not even going to pretend that. But yes, I think that it certainly makes a lot of sense to do so. I think it's an interesting idea. I think rotation is utter dross, but it's an interesting idea when people do look at it. It's like discovering patterns if you're a child. Well, there we go. Shall we move on to bold claims and the exciting news that somebody has gotten off the board?
Yeah. Finally, we've got a winner. So it's not one of us. It's not going to be one of us. So we're both on 0, but the community have come through with a winner. It was I can't remember who actually put out. Was it Dave?
Dave.
Yeah. So he astutely said Rashford and Bruno sellers to get what they deserve. I think we can confidently say that we did. And even though that could be abstract, maybe he meant that they deserve success for selling them. I think we interpreted it as the both.
That's what he said. He was keeping it quite deliberately beige and vague.
Yeah.
So he could work either way.
Yeah, so we interpreted it as they both haul. Obviously, both of them got 2 attacking returns each, 19 points between them, I think, in the end. So I think we can confidently say that was a success. They did give us what we deserve to any sellers out there. So yeah, listeners are on the board. We are now playing catch up against you guys out there. So shall we move on to our game week 4 bold claims, which might be a little bit less bold than normal because we're desperate to get on the boards.
I was just going to say that even if we had let Dave's CZ be kind of interpreted another way, the second, we've got a shout out John O Forward here, whose bold claim for the week was Awoniyi matches Haaland's points total. So yes, I think there was, either way we were screwed really. Last week the claims were for you and me. Calvin Morris scores versus Chelsea. Nope. And also Arsenal hit 5+ versus Fulham, which was nope. This week I think we have maybe gone from the bold to the beige, haven't we?
A little bit more so, yeah. But considering the amount that we're all having a dig at the likes of Richarlison in the community at the moment, I think my claim is maybe medium on the spice charts. We'll see. But Richarlison to open his account, so score against Burnley this week. So he's been off to a bit of a rough start, but I think the returns are coming. And I think against Burnley, like I mentioned with Maddison as well earlier on in the pod, I think they will benefit from, because Burnley weirdly are playing quite a high line, and Maddison and Richarlison should hopefully benefit from that. Maddison, I think, is going to score well, but Richarlison should also benefit from that too. So I'm going with Richarlison to finally score his opening goal of the season against Burnley this week.
I think I'm more on the lemon and herb side of the spice scale. I've gone for Everton failing to score versus Sheffield United. I thought they would. Admittedly, Man City is one of those games where you have to really set up in a certain way. But I thought they were defensively fairly sound, which is, again, maybe what they're going to have to major on in order to stay up, have that sort of defensive solidity and then hope to get a goal like Hamer's goal the other week in Nottingham Forest and like the goal that Bogle scored this week. But yes, I think that they, against a fairly toothless Everton, I think that there's a good chance of them keeping a clean sheet against the Toffees this week. So I'm back in the Blades. I'm not sure whether I will be playing Baldock over over Mr. Saliba, but it's one where I'm happy to back it in bold claims. And if I do end up playing Baldock over Saliba, it's probably one of those where I'm glad that the deadline again is on Friday, and I won't be kind of looking at it drunkenly on Friday night because. My rule, Sam. If I wake up that team on Saturday, that's the team I end up with. No, I think that will probably be it. But yeah, we've got a few community candidates this week to look over, and we've got to kind of try to pick one out. There are a few really good ones. So we've already mentioned one. FPL Matt said Bowen outscores all the other mids this week. I think that's probably quite viable. Is it bold? Beige? I don't know, Matt. I think we're again looking towards the Magnolia level of the everything.
To outscore all mids, though, that's hard.
I'm interested in that one. Planet Sky, Ian Parrin. I like this one. Obviously, hi Ian, a big Sky player. 80% of Game Week 4 fixtures are home wins. I think that could be that's again quite spicy. I like that one.
Quickly checked all the home fixtures this week. Hang on.
They are quite good. They are interesting. That's an interesting one. Nathan, Villa, smashed Liverpool, Anfield, Diaby and Watkins Hall. He does own both of them. So, yeah. Obviously, he did listen to you, Sam, and bought Diaby in early doors.
If only I listened to me.
Yeah, exactly. Joshua Biggs, United to beat Arsenal comfortably. Boo! Hiss, Joshua. But yeah, that's another one. And Garnaldo, simply Gabriel back in the Arsenal 11, which probably is similar to your one on Richarlison. It's kind of like on paper not particularly bold, but actually if you look at the kind of the wider discourse, it might actually be quite bold.
Yeah,
So what do you think of all those? I'm quite like I think it might be between, sorry to the others, I think it might be between Ian on the 80% of home wins and Matt's Bowens. Which one do you kind of lean towards?
I quite like the Bowen one. I know I know it's probably not bold on the face of it because he probably will do well against Luton. But to outscore all of these mids when a lot of them have some really good fixtures this week. The Man City mids could do really well against Fulham. Raheem Sterling against Nottingham Forest. Maddison against Burnley. Obviously, you've always got Salah in the mix as well. The Man United and Arsenal assets could do well. Like, there's a lot of competition there.
Foden as well versus Fulham, right?
Yeah, Foden against Fulham. I bloody hope he starts. But yeah, if he does, I am pretty confident of a haul there. So yeah, I think that's bold enough. And we always like seeing the community score points. So I'd be happy with that. I also don't mind the look of the 80% home win. So my vote's probably for Bowen.
Okay, let's go with that. We'll go with that this week.
Cool.
Excellent. Right, a few questions to round off the pods at the hour now, which is quite a good time to start the questions. Hindu Monkey, he of copy and pasting fame, mentioned value this week already with Sterling and Maddison and just a general midfield glut of happiness when it comes to spending not very much money. He said, do you honestly expect value to play a role this season? Typically losing 0.1 million on a player is worth as much as a hit early on. There's that old thing, wasn't it? 0.1, 0.5 at the start of the season. So you don't want to snooker yourself. You want to kind of get those players in. But he says, with everything going on this year with the pricing and come double season, will we end up sitting on a slush fund of those cheap players? Like, what do you think about that? Do you think that pricing's been taken out of the equation? That's something that we've spoken about a fair bit, I guess.
Yeah, I think for the time being, relatively speaking, it has, but I think it only takes one Salah haul and all of a sudden it's not again. So I think even though it doesn't seem that relevant right now, come game week, is it 6 or 7, Liverpool's fixtures start looking really positive again. Even as soon as then, it might start becoming an issue for those of us who haven't saved that money or caught a couple of those rises. I personally always go late with my moves unless I'm going to be locked out of a very specific move I really am desperate to make. So I'm usually the one that will suffer more than most if this were to happen. But I do think money is important. It's not important right now, but having that rainy day fund building and making sure that by the time Liverpool become an entity again that we are keen on owning, that's when we're going to want that money. And Mark, obviously, Black Box, has already been talking. He's a Salah owner, and his maneuvers at the moment are a lot more restricted because he's got Salah in the side. So we can already, through watching that, I can almost see our futures of having this restricted path when we eventually do inevitably have Salah, as long as he doesn't actually go off to Saudi Arabia, which I don't think is going to happen realistically this summer. So yeah, I think eventually it will be important, and therefore every price rise and every fall is already important. It will only pay dividends in a few game weeks' time, I think.
Yeah, you're right. I think price doesn't matter until it does, which is, I'm sure, something you've been told in your life, Sam.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter.
It
doesn't matter until he actually does. But yeah, no, it's absolutely. I mean, this year with the leveled pricing, you need a pretty extreme set of circumstances for it to really matter. I mean, even though Mark is potentially looking at kind of 1 or 2 moves, it probably isn't that bad. But this year, if you get Salah, Trent, Trippier on top of Haaland being in the zeitgeist, suddenly we do have a problem.
Yeah.
And suddenly those people who did move on a Monday night for a player and have gotten, say you bought Sterling and Maddison in this week, and they end up on 0.3 by the end of the week, then maybe you are kind of in hay. But at the moment, given the fact that you can take the example of Salah, right? Yes, so Salah obviously guarantor of minutes at the moment. It's what we know now. But by game week 6, when we've got more information, more data, we can see how Klopp is going to sort it out. You could have Diaz or Jota, who are a lot cheaper. You can have Szoboszlai, again, much cheaper, or even Darwin who come into the equation. So you've always got information that you kind of, would you want to bet against Salah? Maybe not, because of kind of the legacy kind of thing going on there. But you do have other options that could sort of emerge during that time frame. If there is that kind of extreme set of circumstances where those guys are all rotated all the time and you need Salah, then yeah, we've got a bit of a problem. And then if you've got, right, okay, Trent's now back to his best, then you've got a serious problem. And then Trippier comes in, Livramento gets injured again or something like that, then you've got a real problem. So it doesn't matter until it does. At the moment, it's a very sort of, as what we know now, Hindi Monkey, completely right, that value might not play a role this season, and that the kind of the main focus is going to be about hopping on and off players. It's just it's hard to navel gaze what will happen going forward when those good fixtures come for Liverpool, when those kind of key men do come to the fore for Liverpool, who were both the pricey ones, and we both loved the fact that they were priced quite highly, especially Trent. I'm kind of just hoping that when that does happen, someone like Diaz, Jota does fit into that sort of nice sort of midfield roll on, roll off stratagem that I mentioned earlier on. But yeah, really interesting question. I think it's when you've got to keep tabs on and see how it emerges, and maybe we'll kind of come back to it. Ask us again, I think, by kind of game week 9 or 10, does value still matter this season? After now, we all own Salah, we all own Trent, and we're all kind of scratching around for 4.5 million midfielders who may play once or twice as our first sub.
Yeah, the last thing I would say on that, actually, it's always nice to have a couple million extra for a bench boost. Like when it comes, having 1 or 2 million extra, if you hit those rises early, having that on your bench, just waiting for a better bench boost rather than having a 4 million defender could be really helpful. So worst case scenario, it's helpful for one game week at least.
This year it's going to be, it sounds like 37 is the big one, and that's going to be one where you're probably arguably looking at the relegation fighters, people who are trying to get into the Conference League or something like that. I think hopefully the upside chaser would be hoping that the league isn't sewn up yet, and that those last two games are going to be like pivotal. So regardless of other responsibilities, have teams like Liverpool, like Newcastle, just playing their first team because they've got to win. I mean, that's what you're kind of hoping for. But that's a problem for future Sam and future Tom to deal with. As people have still got our bench boosts intact. If you've done well on your bench boost, fair play. I know James from Planet FPL did do that. FPL Stomach, if Botman is out for a long time, are we down on Newcastle's defence? And does that mean we look at their attackers instead when it comes to it in game week? I think it's game week 6.
Yeah.
Interesting one, isn't it? I mean, just to reel out the fixtures very quickly. They've got Brighton and Brentford next. So both teams that a lot of people do have coverage for. So maybe you would intellectually, you don't really want kind of to buy a player that your team is kind of players in your team are facing. I don't think like you wouldn't want to buy like an Isaac this week because you may own his opinion. Brighton as well. You probably don't want to buy a Newcastle defender because you may well own him Bumo. But after that, game week 6 onwards, they come into a fairly decent run. So Sheffield United, Burnley, West Ham, Crystal Palace and Wolves. So again, on the table at the same time Liverpool are, maybe a decent kind of wildcard time then. You never know. What do you make of Newcastle at the moment, Sam? Are you rushing to pick them up?
I wouldn't say rushing, no. They're definitely catching my eye enough to make me think around game week 6 they'll be interesting. Trippier's the one that I'm most interested in. If Botman's back by then obviously that bolsters them defensively and I'll have less concerns. I think the secondary concern we already mentioned earlier on in the pod is minutes in regards to Trippier. So we'll know more by then as well, hopefully, regarding whether Livramento is going to get some minutes off of him. So yeah, I'm kind of saving or trying to save some money for that Trippier move from the likes of a Saliba around game week 6, but I'm not locking that in as a future move at the moment because there are those question marks over Newcastle and the way they'll set up beyond game week 6. And if Botman's out injured, it will have a negative impact. How much is up for debate, but they're still going to be a good defense. It's just whether or not they're a good enough defense to jam in a Trippier at 6.5 million, or ideally, if Botman's back at 4.5 million, hopefully even cheaper by that point, 4.4, 4.3. that would actually be a really simple move. So I'd be more tempted with that. Attacking, like in terms of like the attackers, Isaac is a phenomenal player, but he gets minutes taken off of him by Wilson probably slightly too regularly for my liking. And even when he stays on the pitch alongside Wilson, he usually takes up a wing spot rather than playing in a dual striker role. So not convinced on him yet. I think by game week 6, maybe I will be. Gordon looks brilliant at the moment, but Barnes is going to take minutes off of him. Almiron, maybe on the right, but I'm not overly convinced. And again, maybe even the likes of Livramento steals minutes from him at some point as a player who can play right wing. There's not too many players there going forward that I'd be hugely convinced by right now. Botman, Trippier are probably the two that I'd eyeball. Maybe even Pope. If Onana's still flattering to deceive, he could be an option. But for now, it's very much a watching brief, and I'll see where the land lies in game week 6 after the Brighton and Brentford games, which I think will have goals in them.
Yeah, you got to chuck in the Champions League as well with the depth of their squad now, which is fairly decent, especially in the areas, as you've mentioned, that you really want to be investing in. So if you get Isaac, as you said, what's to say that they've had a really tough game on the Wednesday or the Tuesday night in the Champions League, and Wilson might play 60 minutes in that game? Like even the Sky Sports commentators were being like, "Oh, you know, the well-known kind of swap that's happening. Oh, Isaac's coming off for Wilson. This is exactly what we'd expect to happen around now." And I think there's going to be a bit of a headache there, and maybe a bit like Pep Roulette. You may see it as being like, you know what, I'm happy to just step out of the Tyndall tarot, because Eddie Howe's not in charge, is he? It's Jason Tyndall, and you know, the Tyndall tarot is just not for me. You mentioned Botman. Maybe that someone like, I don't know. Fabian Schär historically has done pretty well for Newcastle, getting a few sort of interesting goals last year at the end. Or maybe it is, as you said, a case of just kind of jamming in Nick Pope and seeing what happens, because you know that he's going to be playing. It's just whatever the hell happens with the rest of them. I think maybe defence is the way to go. It's kind of like proto-Pep when the Pep Roulette was all in the midfield and the attack. The defence was fairly solid, so maybe it would be the defence. I mean, it's one of those where we'll have to see how it evolves, as Sam mentioned. Related to this sort of, maybe FPL Gills, your views on the best 5 million mids. So kind of my initial sort of answer for that was, well, Anthony Gordon, but he's 5.5. I don't know. It's a proper. I'm not entirely sure where this question particularly originates from. Maybe it's kind of making moves and needing to spend like a certain amount. I mean, if you're playing with a player who's 5 million in midfield, just go down to 4.5 and kind of play a defender who's playing Udogie over that player. I mean, if it's a 1 week thing, then fine. But you've got to kind of have an idea of kind of eventually shoring up that spot. That guy always needs to be your kind of your 12th man. Maybe like Papsar at Spurs at 4.5 is probably the one to go with.
The best I could come up with at 5 was Gustavo Hamer. Possibly.
That's good. That's a good pick. Just one of those who's going to come through every now and again. If he does start, David Brooks at Bournemouth, my fellow Hodgkin survivor, a good man. But other than that, I mean, it's slim pickings. So you don't want to be, you just don't want to be kind of relying on a player of that price point. I don't think that's fair enough with that one. Final one, your aunties, I should say. Would you keep Gabriel knowing he'll drop in price to have 2 free transfers over the international break in a couple of weeks? With a player like this, we mentioned this sort of earlier on in the defence, but I think just kind of widening it out to be, if there's a player knowing they're going to drop in price, knowing that there's some question marks about them, I think maybe that kind of feeds into what you're saying earlier on, Sam, about kind of the weakest link and fixing that.
Yeah, I think with Gabriel, 3 game weeks is probably just too much at this point. Like, I still can't work out why he wouldn't start the next week. Like, I think he should start against Man United, but Arteta, I thought he should start against Fulham, and I thought he should start the week before that as well. So there's something going on there, and I know there's a tactical tweak going on that would mean that potentially his place isn't as secure, but he's still a good enough centre back, and they've got injuries that would in other years gone by and in other systems, they would just revert back to what they know and what worked last year. And because they've not easily done that, it makes me think that he's just continuously going to be at risk. So at this point, I think he is a weakest link in any side. At some point, he'll start games again, and it'll be annoying when you sell him and he eventually does start again. But at this point, I think the price drops, the fact that there are other 4.5 million defenders that you can drop down to, save a little bit of money still, whilst you still got the chance to, and capitalize with some attacking upside like a doggy, like Cash even at 4.5. I think it's a pretty simple move at this point, to be honest, and just get it done, rip the Band-Aid off, and then open up an Arsenal spot, which at some point you're going to want to use anyway. So look at it that way.
It's one of those where you've got a transfer that's kind of waiting to happen. And sometimes you can kind of happily maroon them at the third bench. So if you have a Gusto or something, that can last for a couple of weeks and so on and so forth. If it is kind of mission critical that you're going to be down to 10 players, then maybe I'd do it. But I don't know. I think you can kind of, it depends on when you're going to wildcard, I think. I think there's definitely scope to think, okay, a lot of, for me, kind of intuitively, I've penciled in game week 8 when Arsenal play City as being the kind of time when I wildcard. But from the discussion tonight, I've started to kind of think, you know what, when Newcastle and Liverpool have both started to get good fixtures around game week 6, and maybe that's the time. So maybe I should kind of reorient a little bit with my moves now and kind of be more kind of short term. It might be worth kind of thinking about that going forward and kind of where you're going to do it. But yes, I think overall standard practice is that, as Sam said, rip the Band-Aid off, just deal with it, unless you can kind of manage your way through the situation over the next few weeks, because money doesn't matter too much. And that kind of is a sentiment echoed in Hindi Monkey's question. Like in days gone by, you'd have needed that 1 million from Gabriel to have the rest of your 11 looking great. Now you kind of deal with it and have him just kind of sat on your bench for a little bit. The problem is if you kind of think, you know what, I want to play this guy week to week, and then there's kind of a bit of a, is he going to play or is he not? And you've 3 out of 3, you've got an L on that sort of proposition. So yeah, it really depends on the team situation. But with a player like Gabriel, I'd be tempted to, if I haven't got bigger fish to fry, just get rid of him.
Yeah, agreed.
Right, transfers and captains.
Let's do it. So it's your team up first, but again, we're pretty similar teams at the moment. The one exception is Mbeumo instead of Foden in the starting 11. Where I think you've still got 2 free transfers for this week. So where are you thinking of using them at this point?
So I'm unfortunately now a step ahead of you, having brought in Bumo this week. And it really is depending on where I focus my transfers. So FPL Review, which I do use, and those people don't like it, but FPL Review has kind of said Matoma to Sterling. I'm happy to do that. I think that's probably where I'll go come Friday. I'm going to wait till the end of the press conferences to try to instill that kind of those sort of good practices in my kind of thing. I know I think they're both going to looking to rise tonight. Sterling and maybe Maddison, who's the other guy I'm looking at. So Maddison from Arsenal is the other move that I'm really looking at. I do have some questions about the Man United defence, so Onana versus Arsenal. I do have some questions about keeping Saliba as well, but I think the XGC for Arsenal does make me think, you know what, it'd probably be all right. I'm assuming Onana will face a lot of shots against Arsenal. I'm hoping that they're going to shore up against those kind of stupid mistakes they made against Forest. So I think it's probably at the moment going to be Matoma and Martinelli out for the moves that you described as the ones you definitely do if you were in my situation. Maddison and Sterling. Again, I know that's kind of fairly template, but I'm quite happy with doing that at the moment. Keep plodding along, and I think that's kind of where I'm going to go. We'll see where I am come Friday, but I think that's kind of looking like it. I know the defense is looking amazing. I've got Nana and Saliba, as mentioned. I've also got Estepinian against Newcastle, but it is what it is. I mean, you know, with the strategy that I mentioned earlier about just focusing on midfield for transfers, I'm happy to sort of kind of give that a go over the next few weeks and see where I end up. I think I'll do 2 free transfers this week. And then next week, probably try to roll it and have 2 free transfers over the international break. Because I always just feel like it's a good insurance policy, especially with the amount of games and the amount of game time we're seeing this year. It might be worth just having that in the bag. But yeah, I think that's where I'm going at the moment. We'll see. I think that's where we're at. And the hauling captain, of course. What about you?
Yeah, it sounds boring, quite similar at the moment. Obviously, I've got in my 11 Foden instead of Mbeumo, and I've got Saliba on the bench with Udogie starting. So that's the 2 differences in our starting 11 at the moment. I think Mitoma is on the chopping block for me. I haven't decided which of Sterling or Maddison I more highly value bringing in first. So I'm not sure I'm ready to jump the price rises and do it tonight. I'll probably wait for more data. And obviously they're playing midweek, both teams in the cup. So I might wait for that information. Like I mentioned last week, I really value that sort of information. And because of what happened with Foden most recently last week, knowing that a player is fit to start feels quite important to me right now with that very recently in my memory. So waiting a little bit longer. I won't be priced out of it if I move Mitoma and Martinelli out for Maddison and Sterling. But then I've also got the question mark of Mbeumo as well. So I need to pick 2 of those 3. And I think that the 2 to go would probably be Martinelli and Mitoma. There is an outside chance I roll the second one and leave Martinelli in against United. Like I mentioned earlier, I do think he stands a decent chance of breaking that high line, getting attacking returns against them, but his underlying data hasn't looked great. I don't think it's quite the same situation as Bruno last week, where Bruno's data was looking fantastic and he was involved in everything they were doing. Martinelli hasn't quite looked that yet for Arsenal. So I'm a little bit less scared of making that move, but it is quite nice having those 2 free transfers if I'm not completely set on which players to bring in this week. But I really like the look of both Maddison and Sterling's immediate game week fixture in game week 4, but then also the long term for the next 4 or 5 game weeks. I want them in for that stretch too. So yeah, I think as it stands, probably those 2 as well. But Mbeumo will be highly considered as well, and I might end up having him instead of one of them. Most likely for Maddison, I think, at this point. So I'd keep the Sterling transfer so I have that Chelsea coverage. But yeah, I'll make my mind up later on in the week, but it will be almost certainly 2 of those 3 as long as injuries don't play a part.
Yeah, that sounds good. And you've got a doggy playing over Saliba. There's a temptation to I know I was joking earlier on, but to play Baldock.
I could see it.
Old claim. I can see it. And FPL Review actually does tell me to do exactly that. So I've been thinking about it, but I think that it's one of those. I'm a bit of an EO coward. So maybe there's a situation where Arsenal do keep a clean sheet for whatever reason. If it does end up being a 0-0, for example, maybe I'd be. I just kind of want that to happen. I don't know. It's one of those I'll consider, but I think it's very unlikely. Whereas with the doggy, I think you've got a much better chance of at least getting an attack in return out of him against Burnley, given the positions he was taking up, as you mentioned earlier on. Cool. I think that's it, isn't it?
Yeah, that's it. So thank you everyone so much for listening once again. We were Who Got the Assist. You can find us online, so on Twitter or X at WGTA_FPL, or you can find me on my personal account at FPL Pricey. Again, I'm the same exact handle on Instagram and Threads as well, and you can find the main account at WGTA.FPL on Instagram and Threads, as I mentioned. If you enjoyed the pod, as always, we'd really appreciate it if you could do one or ideally all of the following, including following us on those socials I just mentioned, giving the pod a 5-star rating wherever you're listening to us, or if you're watching on YouTube, giving a like on the video and maybe even subscribing if you're enjoying our content would be highly appreciated. It really does help get the pod out there.
It does indeed. Well, thank you, Sam. We hope we assist you this week. Let's see if we do get those midfield picks within our teams, and then next week come back and be like, why did we sell Martinelli and Matoma? They've both got double-digit hauls. That's FPL for you. Speak to you next week. Take care.
You too.
Oh, it's a goal. Who got the assist?